Well, hey everybody, welcome. And in fact, we have a new title of the webinar series. You can see, welcome to What's Up. And right now I've got it on the slide. There is no fly learn, although we've got some variations on that. So we'll figure that out and get that nailed down. But today's episode is Do Two Wrongs Make a Right? And we're going to talk about error-based learning to gain mastery of your flying. So a little different topic than we might do normally, but I'm thinking we could get some cool stuff out of this one. So let's do a little bit of housekeeping before we move on. As always, if you are on a PC, you will see your attendee control panel like this one over here on the right. And the big thing is, if you'd like to ask a question, make sure you look for the question box down below here. And in fact, you'll find that by clicking on the little bubble, like a little comic bubble icon. That will open up this box. You type it and then make sure you hit that send button so that we will get the question from you. If you're on a tablet, look for the little question mark up here in the upper kind of right corner of your display. And again, same thing, type your question and make sure that you hit that send button so that we get it. And I see somebody says, why do we change the name?
Already.
We will explain that. Yep, we're going to explain that in just a moment here, just a little bit. All right, so as always, my name is Chris Moser. I am the Senior Director of Flight Training here at AOPA, and I'm a teacher and a CFI for a long time, and I work on things to help CFIs and flight schools. And with me, I'm always glad to have with us, is Dan Justman.
Good afternoon, everyone, to those of us that are in the Eastern time zone or further east. Good morning to the rest. Happy to be here, happy and proud to be privileged to be able to lead the You Can Fly initiatives, the High School Flight Training Flying Club's Rusty Pilots Initiative, instrument-rated private pilot, not nearly the experience that my friend Chris Moser has up in the air, but do love general aviation and even more so love sharing it with others. And with that, would like to introduce our favorite behind the scenes guy, Stephen. Say hello, Stephen.
Hello, Stephen.
Well
hey, somebody put it in the questions too.
Time I got it right.
All right. So, coordinator with the Flight Training Initiative. I work directly with Chris and Dan here, just supporting GA and the mission that we do here in the You Can Fly department. So it is my pleasure and privilege to be here every day.
Awesome.
And we are glad to have you with us, Stephen.
For sure. Awesome. AOPA Foundation is the home of all of the You Can Fly programs. Not a single thing or program or tool that the You Can Fly groups provide is supported by AOPA member funds. It's all supported by donations. So if you enjoy what you see here on What's Up, formerly known as Don't Get Rusty, and any of the other tools or programs that are done through the You Can Fly programs, please do support the AOPA Foundation. You can do that in any size donation at aopafoundation.org. Thank you for your support. We love being able to do what we do for general aviation and general aviation pilots.
And hey, Dan, just in preparation for this next slide, somebody is asking, Miguel is asking, is this presentation being recorded?
Miguel, today is your lucky day, buddy. Yes, it is being recorded. And you'll be able to find those on YouTube, the AOPA pilot video page, and also AOPA.org webinars page, so webinars.aopa.org. Both have a Don't Get Rusty playlist on there right now. We will be changing those titles over. We just wanted to get up and running with this new show. We will do that in short order, but for now, you'll be able to find this. You find something that you like, or maybe you've got a question and didn't quite get something right, you can go back and watch it there. For those that are watching live, you are eligible for wings credit. So the FAA Wings Pilot Proficiency Program, you're eligible for wings credit on this. But again, only for those watching live. If you're watching the recorded version, you will not be able to get credit for that. If you've registered with your FAAsafety.gov email address, there's nothing more that you need to do. We'll take care of it. Stephen will capture all of those registered email addresses, send those into the FAA, and in a few days, that wings credit will show up there. If you're not sure if you've used your FAA safety.gov email address to register for this, please email us, ftinitiative@aopa.org. That's flight training, ftinitiative@aopa.org, and we'll be able to make sure you've got the right address on there. Go ahead,
and hey,
Chris.
Dan, I know Stephen has a link that he's been using to gather those, so he'll probably throw that into the chat. Am I correct, Stephen?
Great.
Oh, yes, I do still have that.
Okay,
Oh.
so he'll throw that into the chat. So if you aren't sure, it just makes it a little bit easier for Steven rather than sorting through a bunch of emails. He's got a form for you. All right, go ahead.
Even better. Efficiency. We're getting better. We've only been doing this for what? 4 years, 3 years?
Yeah.
Awesome. Finger on the
27
pulse of
years.
technology. I love it. Very good. Awesome. So with all of that covered, I'm wondering, Steven, did we mention
Slide.
Oh, slide. Sorry. Sorry about that. I was
we
answering
are
a
a
question.
well-oiled machine today,
You
and I
missed
thought I
Mr.
queued that
Q.
one up perfectly. Ah,
So, did we mention today in 1958, Congress approved a bill creating the FAA? It was actually in response to a growing number of air traffic incidents and growing airspace usage. So they combined the responsibilities of the Civil Aeronautics Board and the Civil Aeronautic Authority's functions into one organization to streamline the process, especially because ATC's regulation was being split between two agencies and making it very confusing at the time. So
There you go. And in fact, too, I know that you just mentioned too the Civil Aeronautics Board. And you'll notice on the sign it says Civil Aeronautics Administration. So there were parts of that within that. So
yeah.
a whole different deal. Very cool. Thanks, Steven.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's get into what we're going to talk about today. Number one, I will talk about why we changed the name and why we're doing that. But after I do that, we will talk today about who makes mistakes. We're really going to talk a lot about this error-based learning idea. And this comes out of some research that I did when I was working on my my master's degree. And as I said, my background's in education, and I started noticing some parallels and things in aviation. So I started to put this together, and this became a huge project just putting this presentation together today. So I really do think there's some nuggets of gold in here that can help you become and help improve your flying or whatever else you want to do too. So I'm kind of excited about that. So we're going to talk about who makes mistakes, what are some of the views traditionally and today in education, and when it comes to errors, how can we learn from them, and what I mean by that is in a more systematic way. We will do a very brief overview of error management systems, because some of you might be familiar with in aviation things like threat and error management, or TEM, and we'll talk a little bit briefly about that. We're going to talk about mindset, and then a thing called metacognition. For those my educators out there, you'll know what that is, but if not, we'll explain that very briefly. And then finally, I'm going to give you some practical things that you can do to improve your flying using this idea of error-based learning and this, this type of questioning. So I'm excited about this. Number one, why the name change? Well, the big thing was that over the years, when we developed or created this webinar way back in 2020 during the middle of the pandemic, we were trying to come up with a name, and then I remember the conversation we had with the original team there, and we came up with Don't Get Rusty, and we're like, people are going to confuse this with Rusty Pilots. We're like, but it just fits so well, which is why we kept it for so long. But it's just, as time went on, we kept saying we need to change the name, and we struggled with coming up with a name for it because people were always getting confused with Rusty Pilots, because this is not Rusty Pilots.
mm-hmm.
Rusty Pilots is a separate program. And we had problems internally with folks here getting confused too between which was which. So that's why we changed the name. But the big part was we struggled. Dan knows this, and Steven knows this really well, how much we struggled and fretted. We probably spent a year trying to figure out a name for this.
Embarrassingly so, yes.
Yeah, it was bad. But so what we came up with this idea of what's up, because we wanted something that reflected what we do here, which is the idea of expanding education in aviation, and kind of talking about things that help keep you current, which was the idea of Don't Get Rusty, helping keep you current, but also doing new things too. So going beyond just keeping current, but expanding and learning new things. And so that's why we kind of came up with what's up, sort of that double word on what's up, like, hey, what's going on, not to mention flying up. And then the three words after, the know, the fly, and the learn, because we want to learn more, know more, and then hope that will help us fly more and better as well. So
Well done.
that said, let's get into this thing. Let's talk about this. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I've used this particular example before. It was a couple of years ago, but it's a great example of to sort of get us into this idea of errors. In 2010, NASA had done a study, and they literally sat on 60 operational airline flights. And you just imagine them sitting in the cockpit and just kind of keeping track of what was happening on the flight deck. And they found in those 60 flights that there were 899 deviations that they observed that happened. Now, nothing bad happened on any of these flights because of the system that the airline uses, that dual redundancy of the crew working together, that was able to mitigate all the things that they had missed. So
Did the
nothing bad
pilots
happened.
know, Chris? Did the pilots know that they were being evaluated for things that they were doing
Yes.
wrong and right? I wonder how much that skewed their behaviors. I wonder.
Yeah, but you've got to figure then, you got to figure that maybe there are even more mistakes being made because we're really trying to
Exactly.
be hyper vigilant, right?
Yeah.
So as far as I know, I didn't actually read the study because I wasn't available. I just found an article about it. But yeah, I would imagine that they would have known that somebody was watching them. So in any case, even so, you have somebody sitting in the back, you're going to probably be on your best behavior. So a lot of mistakes, deviations that happen. However, this is probably counting where something like maybe the first officer or the captain did something, and then the other crew member caught it and corrected it using their procedures. What do we take away from this? The big thing here is that mistakes are going to happen. We are human, and if you ever look at your human factors and that sort of thing, we know that mistakes happen because we are human. It's going to happen. But the key part is we can minimize those, and that's that whole presentation that I did. It was about a year or two ago on flows. I talked about using flows and then backing yourself up with a checklist as a really good way. And in fact, we just did a social media post where it's coming out soon of me talking about that same concept again. And so think of to yourselves, how many times have you forgotten to pull carb heat on? It's like, has that ever happened to you where you find yourself, you go into land or you're doing your go around or whatever, or just doing a touch and go, and you realize, oh shoot, I never pulled the carb heat on when I was on downwind coming in. Maybe for me, I know that I have a tendency that I tend to come in high on final, which is a leftover from my freight flying days. And so that I know that I have to think about that. How do I fix that? So what kind of errors? Have you ever had it where maybe you've been climbing out and realized you looked at it like, oh shoot, the flaps were down. I had 10 degrees of flaps in and I never retracted those. So things like that, or maybe I didn't put flaps in when I was landing. So things like that can happen. So we know that we're going to make errors. And I even said, think back to your recent flights. Did you miss anything? So there, Dan says, yeah, Dan.
Yeah, reporting. Sometimes I get so focused on checklists and next steps that I am not spot on with the report 1 mile, report 3 mile, whatever the instruction from ATC was. That there's times where I'm like, report 2.5. 528 Make Juliet 2.5 miles instead of 3. But that one catches me from time to time.
Exactly. So it's that exact kind of thing. And so what can we do to help us do that? And in fact, I know there's an old, and I can't remember the exact phraseology. I had thought about this, or I had this brief recall of that saying that says, like, that idea of if who's a better pilot, maybe a pilot that's got 200 hours that has spent a lot of time thinking and analyzing, or a pilot that's got 1,000 hours but has flown the same hour 1,000 times, and hasn't really learned anything from it. So there's a key part here of getting better. So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about, and I see Scott there's asking, what constitutes a deviation? There are definitions in the human factors part, but just deviation would be something that they missed, something operationally that they did that was missed. And what I'm gonna focus on today is not so much things like threat and error management in terms of worrying about accidents or things that are more serious. I'm talking more today about what we can do to learn to refine what we do. Because just as Dan said, there are going to be little things that really don't have any major impact on the safety of flight, but that we know that we can do better and that we miss. And that's the stuff that I want to talk about today. And how can we improve on that? And how can we get better and better and keep progressing? So when it comes to errors, I wanted to take a step out of aviation for a second and just look in terms of the historical parts in education. And this fits in with whether it's school teaching. There's actually 2 articles that I've got a great handout for you guys today. I got lots of stuff. You see all the stuff that I was reading as I was putting this together. In music education, or just in any kind of teaching, or in being a professional musician, there's an article too. And please note too, there's an article from NAFI, the National Association of Flight Instructors. You may not be able to get access to that on that handout because it is behind their member wall, but I did cite it anyway. But in there was a gentleman too that was a professional musician that became a flight instructor during the pandemic. And so what I wanted to do was look at some of these views of errors and how we can learn from them. So the traditional view in education was that errors are problems. And so it was called, and for those my educational people out there, there's the behaviorist side of education that was, we are trying to get you to change your behavior from A to B, and there's a pathway to get there. And what the goal is here is that errors are just a waste of time. All you're doing is practicing the wrong thing. So we want to provide you broken down little step-by-steps to help you avoid the errors in the first place, because we look at it as a formula. If we give you the proper steps, you will not make mistakes, and therefore you'll get to the end result with no errors. And that has very much been a tradition in, for example, in teaching music. And I can kind of remember sometimes some of my flight instructors being the same way, or some of my teachers. And the idea there being to eliminate them to avoid learning things the wrong way. However, as time has come on, people started to realize, and researchers started to realize, that maybe that's not the best way. And what they found too is that, I don't know if anybody's ever had this experience when it comes to school or with an instructor, but sometimes we get terrified of making an error. And then therefore that can cause stress and can cause us to kind of freeze up when we go to try to do something and end up making more errors as a result, because we're so concerned about doing it correctly, perfectly. And the part that we know about being human is that we are not perfect. So therefore, what we want to do is there a different way of looking at this? And that's what this whole view is about. It's based in this next slide here, which is talking about the more modern view. And this gets into, from education people out there, constructivist type learning. And in fact, it's in the aviation instructor's handbook as well, if you want to read more about that. So the modern view is that actually errors are not something that we need to be so concerned about or so stressed about, because we know that we're human. And in fact, what errors we should look at instead is just a different mindset or different way of looking at it, are opportunities to learn. When we make a mistake, okay, what can we learn from that so that I can eventually get to where I want to be? And in teachers or instructors, when I say teachers, also for flight instructors too, they can then take these opportunities to learn and help guide the learner, the student, along in that process to get where we want them to be. And so instead, what this focuses on is like, well, why did you do that? Like, what happened there when you made that mistake? And I know that I've done this in instructing, is you start to ask the person, so what were you thinking when that happened? Or what were you doing? Or what were you trying to do? And what we can then find out is we can figure out from our learner what's going on and say, oh, I see, you were thinking about this particular thing. And instead, what I want to do is switch it around so that, it's like I can help direct you on how you could think about that to get to the right place. And the other part is that we also know that when it comes to that, there's not always one way to skin a cat, right? There's different ways of doing things. So people might figure out a slightly different way of making the same thing happen, but if it works for them, that's all good, as long as everything's safe and is being done properly. And I know I see Ken there asking, when did students become learners? It was something that I know came out in the recent aviation instructor's handbook. My training as a teacher, and the one thing I learned as a teacher is that when it comes to buzzwords in education, they tend to change things, and it's all the same stuff. So good teaching tends to be good teaching, but that doesn't mean we can't improve and learn new ways of doing it that might be helpful. So just getting ready to move on to the next part here. Learners, what it can happen is that by allowing them to make errors and then allowing them and helping them process why you made that error, we can often get deeper understanding out of that than just doing it perfectly the first time. And in fact, think about that. If you've had a question and you went to somebody and said, hey, I got this question, instructors are just really well known for this kind of trick, which is like, I have this question, I was wondering about, what is this regulation or what does this mean? And have you ever had an instructor say, where would you look that up? And then have you go look it up. And in the process of looking it up, you end up learning way more than you would have learned if they had just given you the answer. So that's kind of the thing too with errors. And in making an error, if I analyze and figure out why did I make that error, I end up learning more about it than I would have if I had just done it right in the first place. And it sticks with you better. And an additional bonus here, that in doing that, we're going to see that we learn so much more about it that we can then apply it to new situations later. And I'll talk more about that coming up in a little bit. So advantages, go ahead, Dan.
Just thinking, this sounds like we could be using this as a parenting webinar as well. This is some great content that I'm going to take back for my to apply with my 4 kids.
And that's the thing too, that one thing I want to say about this is I'm applying this to aviation, but in reality, and I play music too. I've been playing music for a long time, which is what sort of attracted me to some of these articles that I ended up reading during my research. And this stuff can apply to everything, not just aviation, but I really do see some value here in our flying as well, not to mention anything else that you're working on getting better at. So advantages of making errors, just to sort of recap that, they help direct our learning, because if we know that we do something and we don't do it correctly, now we know, well, now I've got to figure out I did something wrong. Now I can try to isolate back to what did I do wrong to then fix it. And then instructors can use that as really as a good way to help the student, the learner, think about what happened and why, so they can redirect their thinking. And here's a key point too, in that teaching them that process, we also teach the person, the learner, the student, how to teach themselves. Because if we can teach them that process, now when I'm out on my own flying or doing whatever else I'm doing, I can use that same process to figure out and improve myself without having to have an instructor right there by my side. So I can continue to improve on, again, whatever I'm doing, including flying. Okay, any questions before I move on, Dan?
Well, we just had a request not to use learner.
Okay, I see that in there. Okay, so somebody doesn't like it. I know.
Yep.
Then, and that's the big thing that's happened with the FAA switch to that in the aviation instructor's handbook. I sometimes call them students too. So it's a hard one. I can't really give you a good answer on that one.
We'll let the FAA know.
Yes. In fact, one of them, I saw somebody here today from the FAA, so we can say something to them if we want. All right. How can we learn from errors? Well, one of the things that we can do is, again, it's that part about being human. We can anticipate that we're going to make them. They're going to happen. And we can recognize when they happen. We can also give ourselves a break when they do happen, knowing that it's going to happen, so we can try to help remove some of the stress. And I'm going to give you some ideas to think about there. We can also practice recovery from operational errors. And again, I'm not necessarily talking about emergencies, things that would get us into the point of, like, a stall spin on that final turn or things like that. So what instead I want to do is think about, just in terms of refining the normal things that we do and making ourselves better, so that we're just that much. Think to yourselves back to when you were a new student pilot, and I can remember this specifically, having, like, I'd be there struggling with the airplane, trying to get it to hold altitude, and my instructor would take over, and it was like, boom, all of a sudden the airplane settled down and just did exactly what they wanted it to do. And I was always blown away by that. And then I remember having that revelation later as I was an instructor, and having my students struggling, and then I was able to just take it, and usually it was trim was the magic thing, trimming it up, and I'm just, they're barely pushing with my fingertips. And what happened was, it was just more of, over time, I had a lot of practice and learned and observed, and I was able to just refine my skills. It's the same thing here. So it's like, for example, I gave you, when you lose concentration using your IFR scan, what do you do to recover from that? And for me, I know it's immediately attitude indicator, and I know what to do. Like, if I get screwed up, I go there, and then I've got my basic scan that I will then use to get things back under control, and then I go back to the more complicated stuff that I was doing. This next bullet point, to me, was one of the most exciting things. It just really stuck with me, which is, experts are not error-free. And I saw this in several of the articles that I was reading. So expert pilots, as we saw at the very beginning, they are not error-free. But then you fly with somebody that's an expert, or you go do something with someone, but it looks like they do it so easily. And it's not that they're not making errors, but what they are really good at is they know how to manage, correct, and recover more quickly than we can. They see it happening faster, they correct for it faster, and so therefore it seems like they didn't make any errors. And I know this from playing music. I've been playing music for a long time. It's the same thing. It's like you have somebody that's brand new and they make a bunch of errors and you can hear it. But people that have been playing for a long time, have been doing whatever for a long time, they are able to they see it faster, and they make the little correction to make it happen. It was the same for me. I think with flying too, is like the people that are good, they have it scanned down. They go, oh, there it is, a little deviation. They fix it right away. So they catch it earlier than we do.
Hey, Chris, speaking of that visualization, Elliot asked, should I quit trying to visualize descending minor pentatonic scales and focus on the checklist on final? Sorry, I thought you'd get a kick out of that one.
Yeah, I would too. The pentatonic, it depends on how proficient you are with it there. And maybe, I would say the landings are a little happier, so maybe go on the major pentatonic instead. So, okay. So I love this, and I really want to emphasize this one right here. This experts are not, remember that, they are not error-free. They are making mistakes too. Mm-hmm. And so what we want to do is strive towards that, is get better at that managing, correcting, recovering, because that's what's going to make us better. And it's okay that we're going to make errors. That's going to happen. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, this is out of the FAA book. So this is the FAA book, and I also found a really cool article it was from the Australian Aviation. I forget their exact title, but basically I believe it's it's akin to their FAA. And they put out this really cool document on threat and error management too that I found just went even into more detail than the FAA stuff that I had found. And so the idea here is, and again, I'm not going to focus on this presentation about emergencies, although this is kind of what they're getting at. In threat and error management, it's a complementary thing. It's something you use in risk management that we've all learned about as part of our training. And the three main components of threat and error management are that you want to plan because there's going to be threats. And the idea here is that you're going to have a threat, something that's a condition that's going to happen that's going to put the flight in jeopardy for safety. And then there's the error part, which is something where we do something that has an unintended consequence, whether we did it incorrectly or we just did something without enough information that then causes the end result, which is what's called a UAS, or an undesired aircraft state. That could be you're in IFR and now you're turning when you didn't mean to be, or you have an altitude deviation, or in the airplane I've gotten too slow on final, whatever the case may be. And so this idea of threat and error management is that we need to be aware of the threats, so we identify them, we plan ahead, and we have countermeasures for when they happen, or when we encounter these threats. We take actions to address the threats or when we make an error, and then we control the progress of the events, which includes getting into an undesired aircraft state. We want to avoid that. But when we do, we even have a mitigation there. So if you know that Swiss cheese model, that it's like we're trying to stop it, stop the accident from happening. So if we can identify things early, correct them, and those sort of things. So the error mindset that's within that, and this is super boiled down. There's way more detail, but again, this is not what this presentation is about. But what I saw in looking at the threat and error management, this idea of anticipate, recognize, and recover. Notice the same kind of things. You're going to see this in the other things I'm going to talk about. I'm looking for them. I know it's going to happen. I recognize it when it does happen, and then I do something to fix it. And if you think of your own flying, to me, that's a loop that I'm always going through. Mm-hmm. It's like I have an altitude deviation. Oh, I notice my altitude is off. I'm expecting it. I'm watching. My altitude is off. So I recognize it. What do? I'm going to then adjust my power, adjust my pitch, get myself back on altitude so that's the recovery part. And then I just start the monitoring loop over and over again. Here's the part that gets a little bit, again, into that the more normal flying stuff, rather than necessarily the part that usually we're talking about avoiding accidents or of worse things of that sort. So instead, what I'm talking about here is that it's the thing called error management training. And there's not as much of that online that I found, because this gets more into the educational sides of things. And it was really studies that had been done on people. They did research studies on this, on people learning with stuff with computers, is how they tested this thing. And the key part here is, number one, there was an emphasis on it's okay to make errors. You are free to make errors. In fact, errors are something we can learn from. If you think about when you're a kid and you're trying to learn something new, or anything you're trying, you're going to screw stuff up. And if you sit and think about it, you say, well, I did that and this happened. That's not what I wanted. So what can I do to try to make that better? And just thinking of, like, my son recently was messing around with a yo-yo, and we were messing around with that. And just think about, as you're learning that, figure out, okay, what did I do wrong there? How do I get the yo-yo to sleep at the bottom to make sure it keeps spinning? Those kinds of things. So it's okay to make errors, but what can we use those errors for to help us learn? When we make those errors, if we take the time to analyze them, we can lead to a better transfer of learning, because we figured out all the ways not to do it. And then the research has shown that piques our attention when we make these errors. And then later, when these things start to happen again, it makes us faster at recalling them, because we've seen it before and we paid attention before when we made errors, and we're like, oh, something like that led to this other thing that I don't want, so I'm going to correct that right now, is the basic idea of what this is. So it's a better transfer of learning. We get a deeper understanding using this sort of methodology. And then the errors give us that valuable information. Right away, we know something wasn't right, so I got direct feedback and I want to make that correction. And then finally, the key part here is, it's that going back to that idea of it's okay to make errors, encourages emotional control. Remember how I talked earlier on about people get so stressed out about, like, I don't want to mess up, and I know musicians out there will know this one too. You go on stage, you get stage fright because you don't want to screw something up, or I'm on a check ride while flying and I don't want to mess up. It's that idea of, I know that I'm going to make errors, but I know that I've learned how to recover from them, so it's okay. So it reduces the stress, which is more than likely going to end up helping me make less errors in the first place, because I know that it's okay, and then I can recover from them. And then I'm going to talk about this idea of metacognition here. So let's talk about, so now we're going to get into the practical parts of this, but let's talk about a couple key mindsets that you should have that can help you with this whole process. Number one, as I've already mentioned, I've mentioned it several times, accept that errors are a natural occurrence. They are going to happen. We are human. That is part of the deal. So we know it's going to happen. It's okay. Two, knowing that, anticipate it. And notice that loop again, right? It's that idea of anticipate, recognize, recover. Anticipate that they're going to happen. So I know that they're going to happen. So then it means I'm going to be looking for them. I'm going to be paying attention so that I can see when they happen. And if I'm in the expert side, I can catch them a little bit earlier and I can make the recovery happen faster too. And then the next part is the goal. Detect those errors, respond quickly so that they become operationally inconsequential, that nothing bad happens as a result of them, because I've already seen them, corrected for it, move on, go to the next thing. I don't know about Dan, I know you said your son's in football, but I know one thing, I went through coaching training when I've been doing coaching with lacrosse and things like that. And one of the things they say in the coaching training is always that part of, when kids make mistakes, it's okay, especially in a game, and they say flush it, just like, it's okay, move on. Because I don't know if you've seen, kids will focus on like, I screwed up, and then that ruins the rest of what they're trying to do, that performance. And instead just be like, it's okay, move on, let's go to the next thing.
I witnessed that happen in my son's scrimmage last night. It wasn't my son, but another kid was really disappointed that he made a mistake in one of the plays, and the coach just came up and said, that play's over, let's go do the next one.
Yep.
Right? That play's done, you got another one to do, let's go. So
you see that application in so many other things. It's like, we're going to make errors, learn from it, and move on. Don't worry about it, because it's just part of what we do. All right. So then learn from what happened. And then the big part here, and this is a little piece of wisdom that I want to share with you too, that I learned this playing music, but it also fits in flying too for a lot of things, is that you want to work towards being smooth. If you think about the expert pilots that you've flown with, or the experts or people that are really good at whatever it is that you like to do, typically when they do it, it seems effortless. Have you ever noticed that? You see them and it's like they don't even seem to work at it. It just, everything happens, and it just happens so smoothly. The way that they get there is you need, when you're learning something, slow it down, because slow is smooth. I can take the time to learn it. And this applies to a lot of things in aviation, not necessarily everything. You can't necessarily do this like when you're trying to land, but slow is smooth. To think procedures, taking your time, because once you get it smooth, smooth becomes fast. And that's how you get really proficient at things, is slow it down, work towards smoothness. And as it gets smooth, it will become fast. So that's one thing I want you to do. Don't hurry through things. I see that so often with student pilots or other people that I work with. They try to hurry through things and they mess up because they're hurrying. Slow it down. You will get better. Okay. Now, there is this idea of metacognition that I want to talk about. This is really important. And this goes again to that point of, we want to analyze, we want to think. What kind of questions can we ask ourselves? And that's coming up. But this idea of metacognition just means basically we think about our thinking. We think about what we've been thinking and what we're doing, and thinking about how we're learning. And that is a key part to this analysis that I want to talk about, that I think will really help you in getting better at whatever you do. Pro tip here. I got this out of one of the articles. This actually came from a classroom teacher, but this totally fits with what we do in aviation. Classify your errors and mistakes. We know they're going to happen. And I see in doing this, this gives yourself a break. This gives you that break on, I'm a human, I'm going to make mistakes, and it's not the end of the world. So if you classify, there are really good 3 classifications here. One is your sloppy mistake. All right. And in doing this, you also, I'll start to give yourself the solution for it. I made a mistake. Why did that happen? That's that metacognitive part. I'm asking myself, why did that happen? It happened, on this case, it happened because I was going too quickly, or I got distracted, or I was unfocused. That's a sloppy error. And so already I have an answer to how to start to solve that one, right? Slow down, pay attention. Then I can redo it again and say, this time I'm going to slow down and do it smoothly. And I'm going to pay attention if I got distracted. I'm going to refocus on what it is I was trying to do. Then I'll correct that error. The aha error. This happens when I do something unintentional happens. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it leads me to know, oh, I just realized something I didn't know. And it usually is a result of maybe I need to learn more about this particular thing. I know last month, we had people asking during spins about the use of flaps and things like that. And they were asking, they wanted to know more about it because more than likely something had happened. And they were like, this bad thing happened. Can you explain to me what was going on? Because I need to know more so that I don't do it again. That's the aha error. The aha error is an opportunity to learn. You're like, oh man, something happened. What was that? Why did it happen? Now I'm going to go dig to find out so that I can learn more so it doesn't happen again. And it leads you to, again, more learning and being better at whatever it is you're doing. And then there's the stretch error. And these are the ones where you really give yourself a break, because this is when you're challenging yourself to do something that don't already know or aren't good at. I already know that I'm trying something that's hard or something new. So I'm going to give myself a break because I know the errors are going to happen. And I'm going to try to learn from those errors to refocus and redirect what it is I'm doing, to figure out what was the step that I messed up on so I can fix it. And notice again, it's not about that I'm going to beat myself up because I made a mistake. Instead, it's, okay, there's the mistake that happened. What can I break down? Like, where did I go wrong? And then slowly go back. And that's where your instructor is really helpful, is in helping figure out what are those steps that go towards that. So in all these cases, identify and then give yourself a break. Ask the right questions, and here they come. So there are 3 phases that I want to talk about, and I borrowed these not only from some of the educational stuff, but also from those basic steps that are in that threat and error management stuff as well. Planning. Before you go fly, you need to be starting to think about and planning your flight. And that goes beyond just our normal flight planning, which you definitely need to keep doing. Plan ahead for the flight. That helps you be prepared. It will help prevent errors because everything will go smoothly when you know what's coming, or more smoothly, I should say. But in addition, and this is that article I talked about from the gentleman who's a professional musician, who's also a flight instructor, he said, visualize. You need to think about, what is it that I'm going to be doing? Think ahead on this flight. Is this something new? And then start asking yourselves these questions. Is this similar to something I've done before? If not, what's going to be different about it? And what can I do to be prepared for that? So start that planning, and that gets into that threat and error management too, of what are the countermeasures I'm going to do for things that might go wrong. So start to think and plan ahead. Is this similar? Can I use things that I've done in the past that helped it be successful before? Or if it's not similar, what do I need to be on the lookout for? How can I be the best prepared I can for this? The next one, what do I want to achieve? Set goals for it. What's my goal here in doing this? So is it to be the safe flight as possible? Hopefully always that's the case. It's to get to a certain location. It's to avoid weather, whatever your goals are. So set goals on things that you would like to achieve in your planning. And then that helps your planning to figure out what it is I want to do and how I'm going to go about it. And then what should I do first? Prioritize. Lay out the plan. And again, it's all just parts of the plan here, to prioritize the important things first, or things that will help me to be successful in the steps that I want to follow afterwards. I'm hoping that makes sense. But it's really just about thinking ahead and planning and visualizing. Now it's like putting all that together to visualize, this is what I'm going to do to help this next task, this next flight go really well. And in this case too, this is where that flight planning comes in, because this is going to feed in to what I do in my flight planning. I'm going to an airport that I've not been to before. That means I'm going to spend more time getting the information, maybe looking up Google Earth pictures. What does this airport look like? How is it oriented? Are there buildings around it? What information do I need? I want to get frequencies written down, because it's not my same airports that I always fly to where I already know the frequencies. So it's going to really cue in those things where I want to do some extra planning and preparation. The second phase, monitoring. This is like that in-flight phase that's during that performance. Number one, I'm going to always tell you guys, have standard operating procedures. If you don't have them, start building them. Because if you can start to build methodology to what you do, you're going to find that you will become safer and more proficient. Airline pilots do it, the military pilots do it, professional pilots do it, and the same thing with other areas as well. So have an SOP, find your methodology for how to do things efficiently and safely. Use your flows and checklists. You've heard me talk about this in past episodes, I know, plenty of times, but that's going to build in that redundancy and act like you're in a crew. Now, here's the new stuff. What are the questions that I should be asking while I'm flying? And these are definitely things that I learned from flight instructors early on. So when I saw these as part of that metacognitive process, I was like, this totally fits. This is what I do. Number one, am I on the right track? I have a question like this that I constantly ask myself, was what's next? What should I be doing next? Always staying ahead of the airplane. And so where am I? Am I on altitude? Are the engine instruments okay? Do I have a spot that I'm going to go land if I lose my engine right now? What's coming up next? Am I on the right track for getting where I'm going? Where's my next navigation point? So it's that constant being aware of don't getting complacent in what I'm doing, but I'm thinking ahead onto what's happening. And this becomes a really good habit and will make you a safer and better pilot. Just that question alone will do that. What can I do differently right now? So as I'm doing things, what's going on, what's happening, and what can I do differently to make this better? Can I be more efficient? Can I be safer? So what are the things that I can do differently? And then the other question is, who can I ask for help? So it's like right now, could I contact ATC if I needed something? Do I have a crew member or another person in the cockpit with me that could help me? And so just think in terms of like that. So those are 3 great questions to be asking while you're flying.
Chris, Scott raised a great question and a tool to help kind of reduce those uncertainties and reduce the risk is between planning and the actual flight. Fly the flight in simulation, so
Yes.
that could help answer a lot of those questions that you may not even realize that you're going to have.
We had, it was a few months ago, we had Josh from Redbird on, and he said that because he obviously works at Redbird Flight Simulations, he said that he goes on and he flies approaches all the time to keep himself proficient. And he said too that when he goes for an actual IFR flight, he will not do that IFR flight unless he's flown those approaches. I think he said 3 times in the simulator because he wants to be familiar with them, and he tries to look at what the weather is going to be forecasted. He really tries to practice, and of course makes it worse too, to give himself that practice so that when it happens, he's going to be prepared for that. And that's a key part. So I totally agree with you. Scott, I'm a big simulation fan, just like you are, that I think that would be incredibly helpful. And in fact, it's going to come up a little bit in here in a couple slides. And then the third step, and this one is one that I had caught on to early from an article that I've got the link in the handout for you. You got 2 handouts for you, by the way. One is the links of the articles that I was looking at. And this is an AOPA article written by Dr. Lapp, L-A-P-P. And she talks about, I think the article is called Take Note. And I will show you the form that I actually created based on her article. And it's this idea of, after you're done flying, take the time to reflect and evaluate, how did you do? And it goes beyond that. So I'm going to show you that handout here in just a second, and it's available for you as the PDF there. So number 1, take time to evaluate that flight and performance. A good CFI is going to do this with you anyway. And in fact, I was reading, I think it was in that Take Note article, as I recall, that she mentioned that the military pilots have been doing this now for a long time, whereas they went beyond just a quick debrief to they actually, if you ever watch like the Blue Angels and the and shoot me one second here, guys. I'm going to open this up because I got something that's going to cause trouble if I don't get rid of it. We're going to do that real quick. Sorry about that. And they talked about how the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds literally will go debrief every moment of that. They brief the flight beforehand and they visualize and fly through it. And then when they're done, they go back through and evaluate every step of the flight too. So, and they said that has created a huge advantage in them becoming better and safer and more proficient. And airline pilots have been doing it now too as part of their debriefing. So go back and think about it. So what are the questions we want to ask here in that post-flight reflection? And I'll show you the form in just a moment. What went well? So think, and then in the form, what it does is ask you what happened, like what were the major events? How did it go? So what went well? If it went well, how can I keep doing that? How can I repeat that performance again? And how can I even refine it? And if it didn't go well, the second question, what could I have done better? What can I do to fix that? And again, think about this metacognitive part here, that term of thinking about my thinking. I want to think, what was I thinking? What was I doing? Why did that happen? What can I do to improve it? Or if it went well, what can I do to make sure I keep doing that again, to reinforce that in my behavior, in my performance, so that I can not only do it that well again, but maybe even do it better the next time. And then can I apply these things I've learned to other situations? Are there other places where I could say, oh, I just encountered this in this particular type of crosswind. Can I apply that to somewhere else? Or I encountered this situation at this non-towered airport. Can I apply that to another non-towered airport that I travel to, or another situation? And in doing this, it goes back to that original idea of that pilot that's only maybe had 200 hours, but has been doing this kind of thing, versus the pilot that's got 1,000 hours that has flown the same hour over and over again without any reflection and any learning. Who's the better pilot? I guarantee you it's going to be that 200-hour pilot that has done this sort of reflection and learning, because they're going to have a much deeper understanding of what's going on. Did you have a question?
Yeah, well, two quick things just to help provide pilots reference on what didn't go well. GoPro footage of the flight, but also using tools like Cloud Ahoy that can help evaluate and provide data to have more than just anecdotal evidence or reflections. That you actually have some data to show how well or how unwell that flight had gone and portions of it.
Absolutely. And I know that even I think ForeFlight itself does that, because I know I hook it into I have one of those units. Forget which one mine is right now. But anyway, I have one of those units, the ADS-B units that has the AHRs in it and everything, and it will show me afterwards all my flight track and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
So absolutely, it's helpful for that to go back and you can see, like, did I have deviations? The simulator, back to Scott, the simulator is a huge way to see that too, because the sims will show that too in the post-flight. You can see what was going on. So here's the form that I was talking about. There's the PDF attached or in the handout section here. So here's that post-flight analysis form. Things to think about, a little more metacognitive part, right? Just thinking about your thinking. Number one, safety. Did anything happen where safety was reduced or compromised? I want to make sure that I put that on here. Procedures. Were there any procedures or checklists that I missed or performed below what I would want to do? For me, I often find that I'm really very, if you've ever flown with me, I'm very checklist disciplined, coming from the training that I had, especially when I was moving from the school where I taught into the flying that I did for the freight stuff. That was just hammered into me, and I saw the value of it as a result of that. But I know for me, I'm very good with checklists, but for me, often the one I miss is my climb out checklist on the climb. Because
Mhm.
usually I'm busy, I'm paying attention to traffic, and then usually by the time I level up for cruise, because a lot of times we're not going super high around here on the East Coast, then I realize, oh, I forgot my climb checklist. But I'm trying to make sure I do my flow, so I try to reiterate that and make sure that I'm better at that. And then finally, problems. Did anything come up during flight that I was not able to solve or I didn't know the answer to? I want to put that on the form too, so now I can go do that research and get those answers. So here you can see, I would write in the maneuver, the event or the activity. I would grade myself. In the article, I think it was Janet Lapp, she recommends 1 to 10. I did 1 to 5 or 0 to 5. It's whatever. My levels I chose were grounded at the 0, like you shouldn't be flying if you did that, to a 5 or an ace. And of course, that's in just a tongue in cheek. Obviously, we said it's okay to make mistakes. We want to learn from them. And then whatever it was, I give myself a grade, and then I'd say, well, what went wrong, and how can I fix it, and how can I do it better, and literally write it down, and then I can think about that and reflect on that, so that the next time I go flying, I can learn from that and use it again in the future. So I've done this with my students in flight training, and it seems to work pretty well. It's a good way. I literally have them write down, here are the things that we did. So I have them write down the things that we did. I look it over. I say, give yourself a grade, and then I have a great conversation with them, because a lot of times they're harder on themselves than I would be,
Yeah.
and they grade themselves, and then they tell me, like, what do you think you should do to fix it? And sometimes they'll give me suggestions. Like, that's a great suggestion, definitely do that. And then they have ownership of that. Or if they don't know, or I can add things in, or if they literally have no idea, then it gives me an opportunity to then say, well, here's some things that I would try to work on that. So this is a great way to do that. Okay, so to kind of wrap things up, to bring it to the close here, the follow-up, what are things you can do in addition to these metacognitive strategies that I've talked about, this idea of those questions that we ask ourselves? Work with a CFI. So if you see things you're having a hard time with, now you can really focus in and go work with a CFI. I want to get better at A, B, and C, because I'm having a hard time with these, and how can I get better at these things, or how can I be more disciplined, or whatever it might be. Work with your CFI to help you with that. Find somebody that can help. Scott, here's the call out for you. Stretch your skills in a simulator. That's a great place. I do that all the time here. I actually keep myself instrument proficient by going in a sim that we've got here at AOPA. And man, if it's been a little while since I've done it, I notice me being rusty on, man, my scan was awful in this, or I missed this part here. And then I purposely work on that. I make myself do it again. And the great thing in a sim is I can pause it, take a minute, think about it, ask myself these questions, and then sort of recover from there and go on. And then I can build those skills that I want to use if it happens actually in flight. And then the last thing that I want to say here is be honest with yourself. It's like, be honest with yourself. No, like, don't be like, oh yeah, I missed that checklist, I'm just going to brush that under the rug. I want to say, yes, be honest. I screwed up. This is something I need to work on. But at the same time, give yourself a break. You're human, and it's okay. So the key thing is, take that as an opportunity to learn, use those questions and those strategies to help you then reflect on that, to build that stuff in your brain so that the next time you won't do it. Okay, let's do the official end and we'll get to the questions. Whoops. So Dan?
Yeah, great stuff. We've got a good amount of questions to get through here, I think, really relative to the conversation. So excited to dive into those. But before we do, we mentioned that our program, the Things That You Can Fly does, is supported by donor funding. But we are very closely related to AOPA, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. The AOPA Foundation and AOPA work hand in hand together. And without one, the other would not exist. And if you're not familiar with AOPA or not yet an AOPA member, we encourage you to do so. Be part of that community. Really, first and foremost, many of the freedoms that we enjoy here as aviators and general aviation around the country are kept free and kept available for us through the advocacy efforts of the AOPA. So a large portion of what that organization does is the advocacy to keep the freedom to fly a true thing for us to enjoy. But also great magazines, great resources, discounts for members on travel and many, many other things. So please do explore that if you are not a member or curious about it, aopa.org/membership.
Cool. And then next episode coming up is September 19th, 2024. Look, I put the comma in the wrong place. Every time on this slide, something gets messed up. So September 19th, 2024, 12 to 1 Eastern time. And we were trying to do a little play on words here, but the idea that we wanted to talk about this next episode was we're going to try to pull on some experiences, and we'll see if we can get a guest or two as well to talk a little bit about what's it like to work in aviation. Because that's one thing that we were realizing as the idea came up, is that we work here at AOPA, and so literally our jobs are entrenched in aviation. But there are jobs that are so widespread in aviation. So we wanted to give you a little bit of an idea, assuming that some of the folks out there maybe don't get to work in aviation as their jobs. They got separate jobs and they do it more as something fun on the side. So we wanted to tell you what are some ways that, that opportunities that might be out there that you might not even be aware of. So we're going to talk about what's it like to work in aviation, and that goes beyond just being a pilot or a mechanic. We're going to go into as many as we can. In fact, as we started brainstorming this, I was literally thinking there's no way we're going to cover all of these. So we're going to just pick out some highlights. But that said, Stephen, I believe you've got a special link for the audience.
I do indeed.
Okay. And so what we've got here is a link that if you in our audience, because I know we've got some folks out there that are aviation professionals, if you've got a cool story that you would like to share, we've got a link to send you. It's fill out the form and give us some, tell us about your story a little bit, and we're going to pick some of those out that we'll share on the air with everybody, and tell them a little bit about your story as well. So we'll take your story and we'll read parts of that or share some of that information if you're so willing. So check it out, Stephen. I'm sure just put that in the chat and check that out. And I'm sure we'll probably send an email out too for those that want to share that information. Mm-hmm. If you have any ideas for future topics, as always, let us know at ftinitiative@aopa.org. I know that we have, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, in October, we've got another ATC episode coming up.
We do indeed.
In fact, it was from our friend Santosh, where he's a regular, somebody who attends the show all the time, and he gave us an idea of talking about what are some good tips that ATC might give us. And so I ran that by our ATC friend Rebecca, and she was like, I love the idea. I would be glad to do it. So we're going to do that one in October. If you got other ideas for episodes coming up, just let us know.
Chris, I'm going to create a post-show analysis form and send that to you so we can get our commas in the right spot on that last slide. So that is what we're going to do as a team to take away an area of opportunity to learn from that mistake.
We need to make a meta-cognitive thing on this freaking last slide, because this is always the one that gets screwed up for some reason. I don't know why. Anyway, do we have any questions, Dan?
Yeah, there's one that I would love to dive into. It was a great point, as we often discuss the concept of normalization of deviance in safety and air discussions, but don't often see guidance on how to identify where it might be creeping into our normal procedures or activities. So it could be flight or otherwise. Any thoughts on IDing normalization of deviance tendencies before they come back to bite us?
Yes. The thing that comes to my mind right at the top of my head is that typically when you see that normalization of deviance, normally what is happening is we're seeing people that are bending regs and bending checklist items. So bending limitations that might be listed on their aircraft or procedurally, because they're thinking like, oh, I don't need to do that because that's not required. Like I'm just going to go fly in the local area today. I don't need to bother getting a weather briefing or to check on that stuff. And I know that there is a reg that basically says that if you're just flying basically in the pattern, you don't require to get it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's smart. But if you're just going to go out to the practice area, that is kind of when you're getting to the point where you do need to get a briefing. And they might be like, oh, the weather's fine, I'm good. I don't need to worry about that. So it's those examples of bending regs, bending checklist items or limitations. I would say that's the place to start. If you find yourself where you're not doing the checklist, you're purposely skipping things in the checklist, or you have your own way of doing things that aren't necessarily what the manufacturer had recommended, that's probably a clue that I should think about, am I starting to normalize that deviance? And that's a good way to do it. So think just in terms of safety and that risk management. Am I taking risks that I shouldn't be taking? And that gets into this whole idea of the threat and error management and risk management in the first place, is like, am I stretching stuff? So I would say that's the place to start.
Mm-hmm. Cool. We had one just come in from David, but it did reference several comments earlier just about managing distractions. So I don't know how much we can speak to that because each situation is unique. But really, scans, checklist usage, all of those things get interrupted by real world things that happen in flying and otherwise as well. Is there anything there that we could talk to on that
The
front?
thing that I would observe there, it's like, unlike in the sim where we can get distracted and we just pause it,
Yeah.
we can't pause the airplane and fly it. But what we can do is take a pause on what we're doing. And what I mean by that is that the things that I will see when people, you know when you're distracted. If you're focused, you follow your procedures. And that's why I focus so much on you mentioned too, the SOPs. If you have a way, like I always do this, I will run my flow, I will do my checklist, I will make sure these things happen. If you find yourself getting behind the airplane, that's the time to say, if I'm in the pattern, I'm going to land and I'm going to taxi off and stop and take a minute. If I'm in flight though, maybe before I get to the airspace or before I go to the next phase, maybe I'm going to take a pause and I'm going to circle for a second and get myself back in front of that airplane. I'm going to take care of these checklists. I'm going to check this information before I proceed on to this next phase, because normally what happens is we're very busy at the beginning during climb up and get into cruise. Once we're in cruise, we tend to have a little bit more time. That's where people tend to get behind the airplane, because they start to get complacent. And then the rush happens during that descent and approach to the airport phase. So if you find yourself getting distracted, it is the part of like saying, you got somebody with you, sterile cockpit, talk to them about that before flight and say, if I have to, put the little thing on isolate so I can only hear myself and ATC and not them. So that's a distraction. But also it's just that part of being able to say, hey, you know what, I need you to pause for a second, sterile cockpit, I got some stuff I got to take care of, and be disciplined about it. Know that you've got these checklists, know you've got these procedures you're going to follow, and be disciplined about it. And if you're behind the airplane, slow down. That's the thing. That's things that I would say I'd recommend. And that's in my own experience from me screwing things up and getting distracted myself. And you're exactly right. Scott mentions here too. He says step one is to recognize that you're being distracted, and that's that metacognitive part. Asking yourselves those questions: where am I? What's going on? What can I do better?
Mm-hmm.
If you practice being aware, you'll start to realize I'm being distracted. And what I do is, we always had a situation too with checklists that we trained, which was, if you, let's say you're doing your pre-flight and somebody comes up and starts talking to you, there's two ways to handle that. One is to say out loud, I'm pausing this checklist at this item and I'm going to come back to it. And if you're distracted enough, I'm actually just going to start over and do the whole thing again and make sure that I stay disciplined, and ask the person, hey, I need to get this done, and I need to, I need to finish my flow, or I need to, like, can I talk to you after I'm done my pre-flight?
Philip chimed in on this one, and I think it's great timing. A good fun way to slow everything down is to channel Bob Ross from The Joy of Painting. Slow down, talk it through like Bob. Silly, but it works. Silly little cloud, silly little checklist. Gonna make a happy little descent into the airport. Maybe that's advice for someone to bite into today.
I love that though. I love that, Philip, because it's like, it's the idea too. Remember I said that slow is smooth, and smooth becomes fast. So it's that same idea there to, just slow down and take a breath, and like, when you find yourself being hurried, now's the time to like, oh, I got to stop, because that is when mistakes are going to happen.
Chris, do you know of any training resources available to work on metacognition skills themselves? Anything there that our audience could work on improving?
The articles that I put in the handout were just a little like the tip of the iceberg, I want to say,
Yeah.
because a lot of that stuff that I'm talking about there comes from the educational field, from teachers. And in fact, those questions that I borrowed just happened to come from a classroom teacher who wrote an article that I linked there, that I was like, these totally fit aviation, because I was trying to think what metacognitive questions, and I read through the ones that they came up with. I'm like, these are perfect that I would start with. So it's a combination of start with that article. You'll see those questions that I put in there, and there's two articles that I listed there. One of them you'll clearly recognize. That's where I got those questions. And then it's more about training in the sim. And I know somebody else asked on what kind of sim. Any sim is good, whether it's Microsoft Flight Sim on your home computer or even your Xbox or on your iPad, up to using a sim that's got all the bells and whistles. Any of them will work, because it's walking you through that visualization or that process of what you're going to do. That's where you practice your SOP. Start to develop your SOP. Like for me, every phase of flight is a milestone. So it's when I do pre-flight, that's a milestone. I do a checklist with that. I do taxi, I've got a taxi checklist. So you can use your checklists to help you to divide these out. So taxi, I get to my run-up area, right? I do my run-up checklist, and then my takeoff, and so on. So every phase of flight, I pause and say, I got a checklist to do, and that cues me in too. You can also use that as a cue of, now I start my metacognitive part of, I'm flying. Ask myself, what's next? What can I be doing better? Who can I ask for help? And can I do it differently? So those basic questions.
Cool. Are you familiar with the 5 chain link metaphor to teach intervention early on? Is that something
I
you're familiar with?
I don't know that I am,
Okay.
or maybe I don't know that term. So maybe if that person, if you're out there, if you have a link to it, email us at ftinitiative@aopa.org, or stick it in the chat. I'd
Yeah,
love to
there's
check
just
it out.
just a question referencing that, and what's the difference between that and TM. So
And I'm wondering if, and I said I don't know exactly, but I'm wondering if it's like there's that chain of errors that happens in accidents, the accident chain. So I don't know if it's that or not. But in this metacognitive being aware thing, obviously you can probably see would help catch those links breaking early, so you can stop bad things from happening.
yeah, but back to the distractions concept, I thought this was a great concept. It's actually part of our training. Instructors deliberately try to distract students
Yes.
in flight training, and a way to overcome that or to identify is just to make that statement: "You are distracting my flying." And I thought that was an interesting concept there.
And in fact, I know that I had an examiner do that kind of stuff too. And literally, it was during my instrument instructor check ride. I remember this guy doing this, Glenn, if he's still out there. And I remember him literally just being like, because at first I was like, okay, I was trying to answer his, and then I would cute. I'm like, oh, he's just trying to be a pain. I literally had to tell him multiple times, which is what he wanted me to do, is sterile cockpit. I'll answer that on the ground. It's like, that is not something we're going to talk about here. And he just wanted me to basically tell him to be quiet, because he was testing what a student might do. And so, yeah, that's what they're doing. And in fact, your instructor's doing the same thing. They want you to tell them, sterile cockpit, be quiet, because it's like, I need to focus on what we're doing right now, and that just trying to help you develop that skill of not being afraid to say stop. And that's also developing your pilot command authority as well.
Good. I think that was a great capture of all the questions that came in. I think we're able to end a little earlier than normal, but great concept, great topic, and interaction there. So I think we're all set.
And I do want to answer. Jeff had this one last one here I just saw. It says, what is your take on memorized mental checklists? And the key there is that the things that I think they're probably getting at things like, what's the one where it's the gas, GUMPS,
Gumps.
gas, undercarriage, mixture, prop, and then sometimes you can do the S for seatbelts. Those are all great. I always back them up with a checklist. So I am a big proponent of a flow. So go back and look up our episode. I think it was 2 years ago. We called it something about flow. We were making the progressive insurance joke in the title of it, but it's about flows. And in fact, we have a video coming out from AOPA social media. I don't know when they posted it. It might be on YouTube now or in the next couple of days. But go look at the stuff I talked about with flows. I think that having a mental checklist and a methodical flow that you then cue yourself to then pull the checklist out and back it up, I think those are amazing. So what I don't like is, I don't think it's a good idea, just from my own experience, is to depend purely on your own memory, because I see people do that. I know this airplane, I've flown this thing for 300 hours, and it's like, it's my airplane, and I know exactly what to do. You still should be using a checklist, because I have a lot of time in 172s, and there are still little things that I'll forget. And that's what the whole purpose of the checklist is. I do my flow, I catch 90%, 99% of it, but there's always like every once in a while there's one, oh, I forgot that, and then I go do it. So that's what I would highly recommend people to use that checklist to back it up.
Awesome. Very good. Cool. Thanks, Chris.
All right, influence checklist. All right, so thanks you guys. And I guess, again, let's just remind you one more time. Next episode, September 19th, 2024, coming up, 12 to 1 Eastern. Don't give up your day job, or give up your day job, we're saying. What's it like to work in aviation? So hopefully we'll inspire some of you folks out there. I know Steven's got the link if you have a story you'd like to share. And so we hope to see you there next time. And so until then, on behalf of Steven and Dan and everybody, thanks you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.